Hello. Thank you very much for coming again to the Spain Pavilion. Today I have been talking about resilience, and now we are talking about innovation. We will talk about innovation, social innovation. How can our societies to be more innovative? So we have a really interesting panel, but first of all, I would like to welcome Minister of Science, Mr. Pedro Duque, and the Secretary of State for Energy, José Domínguez. They will make some introductory remarks, but let me also introduce our wonderful panel that will be moderated by Kirsten Dulup. We have Julio Lumbreras here. Thank you very much, Julio, for coming. Carmen Vela, it's a pleasure to have you here. Of course, Mariana Machucato, we are so happy you are here. And Asunción Lera, welcome. Thank you very much. So now we will give the floor to Minister Pedro Duque. Unfortunately, he will have to leave soon, but thank you very much for taking your time of being here. Thank you, Minister.
Well, good afternoon to Good afternoon to all of you. Hopefully everybody has had lunch by now. And simply thank you to all the experts who have come here to talk about mission-oriented policy for Horizon Europe. It is a great honor to be opening this session. Certainly the European Union has made big steps into promoting innovation and science, and in this particular case, in the last couple of years, we have been talking about what's going to be the organization of the next framework program from 21 to 27. In the past framework program called Horizon 2020, we have we are really proud of the performance of our own country in science and innovation. So we have some numbers here that about 10% of the return of the funds used for Horizon 2020 have been returned to Spanish innovators and scientists. As a country, as a state, we have a return of that makes us be fourth in the ranking of countries with the highest number of return. That is much better than the previous 7-year program, in which Spain was sixth, so we are improving there. And actually there's one number that we keep repeating that is also important, that is the Spanish scientists and innovators have been ranking number one, actually, in the number of projects that are international in nature and that are led by our scientists. So we are quite proud that the country has achieved quite a big maturity in the promotion of science and innovation, and therefore we are looking forward to a very important participation in the next Horizon Europe. We have been participating very actively in all the discussions, so that Spain has been at the forefront of country level or state level discussions within the European Council for the shaping of Horizon Europe, and we continue, as you will see here, being active in the participation. One of the most important additions that the European Commission has proposed and everybody has embraced in New Horizon Europe 21-27 is the structure of missions. And this is the topic of today. It is a much more effective way in which the European Union is going to structure public-private cooperation to promote innovation. We have been trying different things in different framework programs, but if we succeed in making the missions be what they have to be, then I think we will have the best possible instrument to foster innovation within private-public partnerships. Why are they called missions? Of course, we have here distinguished economist Dr. Matsukato, who will probably give us some very thorough and important ideas about why do we call it. But obviously, being astronaut myself, I pride myself on thinking that I understand a little bit what this comes from. So this comes from the United States space program in the past, in the 1960s, in which, probably without knowing what they were doing from the point of view of economical theory, they decided to put public funding into creating drive of public and private structures towards a very concrete goal that was measurable. And that was, before the decade is out, put a man on the moon and return him safely. And this was this is the inspiration for the current concept of missions. It has to be the drive for something that is concrete and measurable. It has to be something that appeals and that provides incentive to the actors that are going to participate in the mission. And all of those characteristics have been taken into account by the European Union, and they have created 5 areas. Still, they are only areas. We don't yet have. We haven't yet gone to the level of detail to define the specific measurable goals, but we have the areas that are listed as adaptation to climate change, healthy oceans, seas, coastal seas and inland waters, climate neutral and smart cities, soil health and food, and then the last one of the 5 is cancer. The 4 first ones, and showing what is the importance and the leadership that Europe wants to have in fighting climate change and providing economical sustainability, are very, very much related to the sustainability of the economics and to better technologies to avert climate change. From the point of view of what has the government of Spain done, as I said, we have collaborated in creating the concept of missions and supporting very much Commissioner Carlos Moedas in bringing the missions to the highest possible level of importance. We have supported that this is done by the Commission in collaboration with the Member States, with the participation of all the stakeholders, that it has to be done with important ambition, and that it should span from basic research to technology development, even with the initiative to trying to go to the technological developments that go directly to market. In Spain, we have created interministerial mirror groups for each of the 5 missions, meaning that several of the ministry, like the government of Spain has created groups that include people from different areas of the government that will be mirrored for each of the 5 missions, so that we can let's say bring together the actors that from Spain will participate on these European Union missions. And one of the big examples is that we will have tomorrow a more detailed event with more than 150 organizations that are going to be devoted. This meeting is going to be devoted specifically to preparing Spain to the participation on the missions. And certainly, whenever we define the areas in which the government of Spain wants to put the most emphasis in development of science and technology, we take very much into account these 5 missions of the European Union. in all of this, I believe that we have shown during the past 1.5 years that Spain has become very active in the work done in Europe, and that we have become one of the most, let's say, one of the countries in which the vision of a united Europe is most prevalent. Our ministry, obviously, the Ministry of Science, Innovation and Universities, has been closely involved in the definition of Horizon Europe, and we have gone to all of the meetings, and we support very much the mission-oriented structure. In fact, we are thinking about having a precursor call within Spain of missions so that we better understand how is it going to be in the European Union, and this will be open in the next days. And certainly, I believe that the discussion here is going to be quite useful for all the Spanish actors to understand what's mission, and hopefully to participate in the same level of participation that we have in the previous framework program. So thank you very much to all of you for coming here and giving us your insight.
Good afternoon, everybody. Minister, friends, thank you for being here with us this afternoon, and thank you for inviting us to make and inviting me to make this presentation here. Well, in the yesterday, someone was saying clearly we have a clear target. The difference between what we have now in our hands and other things like development of electronics or development, here we have a clear target, and that is climate neutrality by the mid of the century. Climate neutrality in 2050. I think that is important to have that in mind and to work for that and to have everything align in this direction. I would like to put, let's say, a surname to this name, and it's, I would say, a climate neutral economy, leaving no one behind. This would be the surname of this name that we can put to our goal. And the way that we have to do this, first of all, we have to take into account that 80% of the emissions come from the energy sector. So our first target on that way is to change our energy sector. And that change only can come from three basic pillars. One is efficiency, the second one is electrification, the third one is making renewable the whole electricity system. If we do that, we will have achieved half of our goal. That's important. And one of the important things, and related to this, to all innovation activities, is that a big part of the innovation and research that scientists and engineers had to do has been done. Today, the cheapest way of producing electricity in a country like Spain is clearly wind or solar. The cost of producing electricity with wind or sun in Spain is half the price of the wholesale market tomorrow. So we have the instruments. Obviously we need more research in some areas, and in particular on energy storage, electricity storage, or any kind of storage like hydro pumping that can help us to have electricity storage. So this is the situation, but we have the instruments to reach that goal. We have a lot of work to do, but we have the capacity of doing that. So obviously this is a great challenge but we have to look at it as a great opportunity that is going to produce benefits in health, in jobs, competitiveness of our industry. So there are many things that should be considered, but in a positive way. We can work together to take advantage of all these opportunities. And this should be done under, I was saying, we have seen how scientists and engineers have done their work, but there is a lot of work to be done by social researchers, political researchers, because the change is a change that includes everything. Yesterday I was also listening to someone that was talking very much about multilateral governance. That's something that must be done. I mean, as everybody says now, emissions don't have a passport. So we have a global problem, and we need a global solution with many different actors participating in this solution. We Spaniards are very proud that today we are showing this multilateralism, working together with Chile to have this event here in Spain. Has been, many people have celebrated this idea and the outcome of this thing. But as I was saying before, this must be linked to the social part of the change. We have to transform our economy, we have to transform the way we live, we have to transform our industry, our car industry, which is the first industry in our country. So there is a great transformation to be done. And this transformation must be done leaving no one behind. So I think that the goals are clear, the challenges are clear, the opportunities are there in front of us. So I would only finish with it's time for action now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Secretary Abascal. So, welcome everybody, good afternoon. This is a panel that I have the extraordinary privilege to paint a scene. For a start, sitting on this stage, you sit between two words, ambition and inclusion. It's the perfect frame for the conversation we're going to have today and for this afternoon. And what I would add into it is a couple of other elements. Ambition and inclusion, framing a space of innovation and climate action, climate emergency. And what you will hear this afternoon are words like directionality, social transformation, and critically, at the base of it, new economic thinking and a new political economy. Most of all, we are going to have a conversation about how ambition, inclusion, and innovation and climate manage somehow to connect to people. Because this whole environment is about people. And the question is, can we make that land, and can we find a way to bring this to hearts and to minds? And that is what brings me to the essence of the missions. This is an extraordinary panel of 4 mission muses. The original mission muse in the form of Dr. Mariana Vanzucato. And I will ask her in a minute to explain why that is her nomenclature within the European Commission. And 3 members of the mission boards within the European Commission, each of whom has been involved in this first process of launching something in a European context that is seeking to structure innovation in a particular way. So I'm going to start, and I'm going to start with Mariana, with an invitation to begin to paint a scene. Why mission-led innovation? What is it about missions that opens up a space for action that responds to this kind of framing? What do we get from missions? And I will ask first, Mariana, if you wouldn't mind, just give us a taste of what was the original conception that Europe has adopted and is now formally adopting with the publication of the European Green Deal 2 hours ago.
Okay, so does this work? You hear me? So Europe has actually for a long time talked about challenges. You might remember that all over the European Commission there was these 3 words of smart growth, inclusive growth, and sustainable growth. and yet we weren't actually getting closer to that kind of growth. And those three words were very important because they admitted that growth has not just a rate, but a direction, the word you used before. So the idea behind the missions was, what's missing? We have money, we're throwing money at SMEs, at innovation, at research, at different types of, again, challenges. So the idea of the missions was to sort of get real, to have a real walk behind the talk of the challenges. And as we were hearing before, I didn't know you were an astronaut, to get to the moon and back again in one generation, which is a mission that we're celebrating the 50th anniversary this year, it wasn't just NASA. It wasn't just, a big public entity telling everyone what to do. There was lots of private initiative as well. There was Motorola, General Electric, Honeywell. But there was a strong push to actually solving a problem. On top of the concrete problem was a challenge, the space race. And today the challenges, I think, are really the SDGs. We shouldn't rethink that. We have those 17 challenges. There's 169 targets beneath them. But if you begin with climate change and turn that into a mission as bold as going to the moon and back again, then the next question is, what does it mean for the change in the status quo? I often say missions should make you feel uncomfortable, not cozy. The change in the status quo in terms of how public and private work together. Going away from kind of a business-friendly mentality, which, to be frank, sometimes just increases profits, which are at a global high, not investment, to actually really picking the willing, all the different types of companies and other types of organizations across many different sectors that can together solve the problem of, for example, 100 sustainable cities across Europe. But then the third dimension, right, so it's challenge, mission, intersectorality, but the other dimension is what does it mean for how we change procurement policy, industrial strategy, grants and loans to really fuel bottom-up experimentation. I'll repeat, bottom-up, because we know top-down does not work. And yet this dichotomy of top-down, bottom-up also is not really the point. You can have directionality and then transform our instruments to get that kind of nurturing of different solutions. And lastly, I want to a bit be the thorn in the side. If we don't admit that this means a new model of growth, including how, for example, in the Commission, the other big DG, ECFIN, thinks about growth, how we think about our deficits, why we have obsessed so much since the crisis just on deficits and not on the structural composition of our investment strategies, then this is a real missed opportunity. Because I do think there's a bit of schizophrenia going on right now. We have these ambitions, we talk about missions, we talk about climate change, but the model of economic growth that we still implement in the treasuries and the ministries of finance around Europe hasn't really changed. So if we bring innovation to the center of how we think about economic growth and say we want to redirect that innovation, that investment towards solving mission-oriented problems, it really means kind of unpicking how we do budgets, how we evaluate public investments away from static cost-benefit analysis or net present value, have more dynamic instruments. So I think it's a real opportunity to both, think about the massive challenge we have ahead around climate change, but also to rethink the economy in the nitty-gritty every day. Because otherwise, we'll be talking about missions, but we'll continue to cause lots of different problems on the side. And currently, we continue to have a Europe which is very skewed in its competitiveness, right? We have Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain, which Goldman Sachs called the pigs. Terrible. I'm Italian, so I can say it. The pigs, which are seen still as spending too much, right? We need to cut their budgets. And really using this as an opportunity to say, actually, the real problem is that there's been a lack of strategic investment in both the public sector and the private sector. And in many of these economies, the private sector has been inertial with low business investment, low R&D, how to use the missions to galvanize, to catalyze, to crowd in new forms of business investment and to stop the obsession about the deficit.
Thank you, Mariana. Thank you very much. So I'm going to extend then the invitation to Asunción, to Carmen, and to Julio. Spain, I understand, is mirroring the missions within a Spanish context, and each of you has almost physically embodied the relationship between a commission-wide intent to address this opportunity and this challenge and a national intent to do something similar. What does each of you see in the role of the structure of missions, as the Minister referred to it, the architecture of missions? What might that unlock for Spain and for the Commission more broadly, for Europe more broadly, from your perspectives?
Yeah.
Please.
You want to start? Yeah. I think that our Minister has been already mentioned. Spain is a very active member state regarding all the policies of the European Union, I must say. And I think that the attitude, the interest for the mission is extremely important. By now, all the group, as you has been mentioned, we have a mirror group. We're actively working. I can talk about mine, but sure that Julio and also she can talk about that. All the actors that has been already involved in the European project, the CDTI, the member, the committee of program has really involved, has been asked people from other ministries, and we has been really create this kind of multidisciplinary mission-oriented program. I really see that we are really in the very early step, and we are very much online with the idea of the Commission. I can feel that this is the idea. The mission of healthy soil and food, when I am talking about, is extremely relevant for our country, for many things, not only for food, but also for forestry and for other initiatives. And I think that if this is the reflection of how the major stakeholders, the citizens, are going to be involved, we are lucky. We are going to be successful, by sure.
Thank you, Carmen.
Maybe I can chip in on that. So to me, I think one of the key issues that is emerging from this relationship with the mirror committees in Spain and our role in the Commission is the learning that we can have across different European countries. I am on the climate change adaptation, so it's the moon and it's all the rocks that are falling on top of you as you go to the moon, right? Those are the climate risks and the vulnerability that we have. So, and those are very different depending where you are in Spain. I live in both extremes between Oslo and Spain, and they are very different, and the perception of our citizens is very different. So I think that learning experience is critical, and it's critical in one of the themes that are also fundamental for the success of the missions, and that is social innovation, and that is a just transformation, where scaling and speeding the innovation quickly is the key. So I think the learning is a wonderful opportunity for all of us.
Yeah, I would build a bit on your words, Asun, because I fully agree with you. And first I have to thank Mariana for this framework. I live in Boston in the US, and I come every 3 weeks to the meetings because I really bought your idea, and I think it's amazing how this can bring these two things together, the ambition and the inclusion. So, I think the mirror exercise here in Spain is trying to be concrete and be specific and do the experimentation that you claim for in your report. So you are saying you have to take risks, you have to experiment. So I think here we have a context, we have a geographical context and lots of stakeholders, and at least in our mission, the climate neutral and smart cities, our working title is 100 climate neutral cities by 2030 by and for the citizens, with the citizens at the real center of the mission. And what we are doing in Spain is we are selecting some cities. We are now working on 8 to 10 cities to start working on this. So even some mayors are here in this room, and we are working on how can we implement this, how can we learn by doing, because we know that we have to do this, we know that we have to include everyone, we know that we have to engage citizens, that we have to bring all policymakers, and here we have a person from the European Parliament, we have these mayors, we have people from different ministries, but we also have people from companies, we also have citizens here and from the academia. But the thing is, we know we have to do this, but we don't know how. We know the why and the what, but we don't know the how. and your reports are excellent, but we have to work on implementing them. So our idea is, let's try to work. I mean, let's start working. It's time for action. So it's not time for narratives or discussions. We have already discussed a lot. We have to implement this. So that's the first approach we are taking. Start working, learning from this, and trying to implement the mission in Spain. And then also trying to learn this and provide some learning for the European Union.
So I've heard the value of a learning experience and learning by doing, including learning how to do missions as one of the essential starting points. The value of multi-sectoral thinking and multi-sectoral collisions and collaborations. In fact, one of the expressions that I've heard mentioned more often than I've heard anything else mentioned in the course of this COP is the concept of radical collaboration. How do we bring collaboration together, but in a way that breaks boundaries, not simply lightly touches over them and shrinks back to the original spaces? Social innovation, the critical importance of finally connecting our technologies and our societies and our economics and a new set of underpinning assumptions for all of them together, and creating spaces for that kind of action. And I would add into what I heard you say, the concept of radical uncertainty. We do not know how to decarbonize at the scale and pace that we need to, nor how to do so in such a way that addresses biodiversity, that addresses the concept of planetary boundaries, and harnesses some of the exponential technologies and exponential social change in a way that is genuinely regenerative, not simply substitutional. One of the things I imagine is going to be extremely difficult for Europe as we challenge ourselves to think like this is to overcome our own inbuilt defaults, the ways in which the habits, the practices, the ways in which we have learned to worry about trust, to worry about transparency, to take care of risk. What do each of you see as being the principal barriers to having mission-led innovation unlock something that is genuinely transformative at the pace and scale we need? What might we get in the way? What do we need to stand guard over?
Fear and lack of trust. Fear and lack of trust. I mean, you said it, Mariana, we need to all move beyond our comfort zones, everybody. And nobody likes that because it's a very difficult experience. So the fear needs to be compensated by cultures of trust. And again, in different European countries, we have very different cultures of trust. Yes. However, I want to be optimistic. I think that precisely because of the focus on citizens and the focus on social innovation, we may have, there is some theories that says if you change 10% of the population, something clicks and rapidly you get into a non-linear tipping point of social change that sparks things, and then suddenly the fear disappears or lessens, and then trust emerges. And I think we need to imagine these situations where things really unexpected happen. Otherwise, why are we doing a mission?
So I began working on missions is this on? Yeah, 20 years ago, but about 6 years ago, I organized a conference in London with what I called mission-oriented organizations. I wanted them to precisely meet to learn from each other about the challenges and opportunities of stepping outside of the traditional box that economists have put the public sector in, which is just fixing market failures. At best, you're there to fix a problem when it arises, whereas missions really mean co-creating and co-shaping markets, not just fixing them. So I would say the biggest barrier right now is, and obviously I say it as an economist, the very static, boring economics framework which is guiding practitioners every day. John Maynard Keynes said that when practitioners think they're just getting the job done, I don't like that sentence anymore because it's Boris Johnson's get Brexit done. Anyway, just getting the job done on the ground. He said, no, you're slaves of defunct economic theory. And so in this conference I organized in 2014, I asked Cheryl Martin, who at the time was the director of ARPA-E. So DARPA, as you know, was a public organization in the US government, which is basically responsible mainly for the internet. ARPA-E was the equivalent organization in the Department of Energy. And I said to her, how do you think? How do you structure your organization? How do you even measure your success? And she said, our reason of being is actually to take risks in order to fight the climate, she didn't say climate emergency, but today we should be using that word. And she said we actually measure our success by how much risk we were willing to take, but also how much economy-wide impact our successes have. So that kind of dual challenge of, yes, take the risk, but it's not just for a little gadget, just tinkering on the sides. It really has to be big, bold changes that can affect production, distribution, and consumption. And currently, let's just admit it, so much public sector capacity has been outsourced. It's been outsourced either to private companies, to consulting companies, to these kind of weird other intermediaries that pop up. And that's the first thing we need to ask ourselves. How do you rebuild the capacity within the public sector, which is not about the size of the state, it really is about the ambition within state structures, also the ability to really collaborate, but also we need to be bold enough to even be willing to redesign the contracts, literally the design of the public-private partnerships to be symbiotic, to be mutualistic, to be truly collaborative. And the word inclusion means that we need to also think of the word value and public and social value and kind of refine our understanding of the commons and the social good, which has really just become, it's kind of withered away. Even the word public good in economics is a correction for something the private sector is not doing. So the public sector has to come in and fund, say, basic research. There's no imagination, ambition, or dreaming ambition behind the word public good. And I really think that if we can together in an interdisciplinary way revive that, we also can make people kind of just feel really part of this for real and not tokenistically. But it does mean finding concrete ways to share the rewards as much as the risks. The IT revolution had plenty of public-private collaboration, but let's admit it, and we see it today with all this discussion about the billionaires, we socialize the risk, but we privatize the reward. We cannot do that again with the green economy.
Thank you.
No, I would like to comment. I think that we have, in this regard, two different aspects to address. I mean, one is the citizens, the society. Another one is the Minister of Finance, as Machucato has been already mentioned. And I think that in order to solve the problem, we can split it. I think that we live in the hand of the scientists, the community, all of us that are already convinced that it's time to change, that we need to do something, to move again and to talk with the citizen, to bring the citizen on board. If not, we are lost, you know? And the data that we are having are quite worried, because we have been work separate for the citizen. I think that is the major value of the mission, to become again part of the society. But for me, even that this is high, challenging and risky, the more important part is to talk with the Minister of Finance. And I think that we can ask Mariana to give some tutorial to the Eurogroup in the European Commission every 2 months to change their minds, because it's extremely important. We are talking here, the chain is clear, the scientists, the community, the innovation, everything is on the table. What we need to do now? To talk to the citizen, to say, well, you are also part of the problem, but you are mainly part of the solution. And to ask to the politician, those that have the money, the pocket, I say, come on, we need to have different things to do, not for us, not for the scientific community, that also we need, but also for the citizen, also to renew our world, also to change everything. So I think that she have a very high task. But we are talking about risk, about interest, and this is the idea that we need to do both things. And I think that the mission have this role. We are going to make science in a different way. You know, it doesn't mean that we don't need to make knowledge science. We need to create knowledge. It's mandatory. Who is going to give us to Europe the knowledge if we are not able to create? But we need to give also solution to the citizen. Enough time to time, they are going to separate to us, and we will be alone. And after that, nothing is going to happen.
Thank you, Carmen.
I fully agree with your barriers. I want to just add one more. So for me, one of the main barriers is the working culture, let's say. Okay, because we have to collaborate. We know that we need these radical collaborations, but people are not used to that. So we have silos, we have sectors. And how can we work across silos? How can we break down these silos? In the Commission, here in the ministries, in the academia. I mean, we have to work differently. And that's so hard. So we have to spend money and resources on re-educating workers. And I think it has lots of different aspects. One is the, let's say, women capacities. And in fact, it's amazing. It's the day I'm best surrounded in my life today with 4 women. And I signed 2 years ago a commitment to don't participate in any panel without at least a woman. And now I think the strongest part of this mission is this new innovative approach that was brought by your characteristics. So you have to change also, I mean, we have to change the workplace in a more creative, innovative, disruptive way, in a way to collaborate between people. So we have to change this. And I agree that we have to spend money on knowledge, but we have lots of technologies, we have lots of knowledge around. And if we talk about Horizon Europe, we'll have 95, hopefully, billion euros on creating knowledge, but we need 5 billion euros to do things differently, to work on capacity building, on creating the conditions and the context to collaborate. So I think we have to spend resources on this.
Can I just say something about the resources? Because actually they're not that large right now, right? So the whole Horizon program, which includes the ERC, the EIC, and the missions, is at best 100 billion?
No, less.
Less.
Yeah.
Okay, at best.
At best.
Let's pretend it's 100, so it's easy to do percentages.
No, let's not pretend.
I can't.
Not pretend.
No, anyway,
We just
84.
lost.
84. So it's low. At best, the missions will get 30. I don't know. What are the numbers that are circulating?
10% of the pillar 2.
10%.
10%
Really?
of the pillar 2 is reducing.
5 billion. 10% of Pillar 2.
Yes, for the 3 years.
I
For the
think we're
first 3
talking then
years.
about different parts. Okay.
That was at the beginning.
Yeah, for the
Really? No one told me it was only 5 billion. Are you sure? I just was speaking yesterday. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Even if it was 40 billion, even if it was half of 100 billion, pretend for the kind of the dream, the ambition, it's still little. The US, which is similar in terms of GDP, because we're looking at the whole European GDP, the US spends close to 40 billion, just under 39 billion, for their missions around health through the National Institutes of Health budget, okay? So this should make us even more determined to make this work, because the ability of every euro to then crowd in and catalyze and inspire the perception of where other actors, especially but not only in the private sector, see the opportunities is really going to matter. And on this, one of the lessons I learned in speaking to these mission-oriented organizations, which include, by the way, the BBC, different public banks like the KfW in Germany, is that how you structure your instruments fundamentally matters. So in Italy, where I'm from, the Cassa Depositi e Prestiti, which is the public bank, is basically a handout machine of subsidies and guarantees. La pioggia di sussidi, right? It rains subsidies. That is not what we're talking about. We're really talking about being able to invest in the early stage, high risk, high capital intense areas where the private sector is still risk averse, but also to redefine those areas, for example, around healthy living, so not just health in terms of the pharmaceutical industry, to increase, again, the imagination and the perception, and to really co-create these markets, redefine the market, which then excites and crowds in and inspires. And for that, we need to admit what has not worked. We need to go look at all the money that has been spent that has not worked that way. And in the UK, where I live, up until now, I think they might kick me out by the end of the week, we tried to help the government transform its industrial strategy away from the list of sectors. They had aerospace, automobiles, life sciences, creative industries, financial services as their industrial strategy. We said, no, make it mission-oriented around the future of mobility, healthy aging, again, clean growth and missions underneath those. And that required really changing how the industrial strategy itself was working. And as soon as we started doing exactly what you just said, which is to look outside of the silos, we realized that just in the Ministry of Transport, the procurement budget was over 40 billion pounds. And so instead of just looking at the missions budget, which was quite small, it was embarrassingly small, the whole innovation budget was about 9 billion, including the universities. What does it look like if you really start to tap into everything government does, where there's lots of money, like procurement, and transform that to be mission-oriented? And all of a sudden you release, even just within the public budget, a huge amount of other types of funds. And I think it's the nitty-gritty of how to do that that will make this for real. It'll allow us to really have that green transition and the Green Deal that today is being announced. If we don't do that, this will be a sideshow. It'll be a little thing that we talk about, but everything else happens somewhere else.
Yeah, another bright, shiny thing on its own.
Yeah.
In fact, I understand the session just before us here was very much about the fact that money is flowing way faster than we realize because we aren't thinking about it in ways that starts to pull it in from the different places. And our problem is being ready to have connected programs of work to really leverage it.
Right. And I wanted to chip in on a different layer, and I don't want to wear the hat of defending the private sector, but I really think we should not throw away the baby with the bathwater, because there is an enormous amount of knowledge, technological capability, engineering that we need. And how do you leverage this to become investors and investments and innovation towards the public good? I think, to me, that's the key. Let me give you a very concrete example. Digital technologies and digitalization. Every company in Europe with a minimum amount of employees is undergoing a digital transformation and investing on this. The vast majority of the usages of a lot of these digital technologies, artificial intelligence, machine learning, is to sell us more stuff. But we can use it for measuring the status of the earth, for understanding soil depletion, for leveraging and changing behavior, use blockchain to nudge citizens to behave in a much more sustainable way by giving them tokens every time emissions are being... So there is all sorts of things happening, but are not redirected. So I think we need to redirect all that towards the mission. So the budget, I don't think any public institution can actually fund us getting to that moon or to Mars. But if we can inspire and kick off things, and then, again, the theory of the 10% and then the non-linear change. We need the private sector innovation capabilities and funds.
Well, in fact, we mentioned before the question around the underpinning economic thinking. Julio and I came from a session literally just before here in the city of Madrid, listening to one of Spain's leading universities talking about decarbonizing the curriculum. We have to go back into the curriculum of schools and universities and reframe the thinking we have been teaching to people and put it into historical view and build new ways of thinking about underlying economics, wealth creation, and the point of the digital technologies, the private wealth creation we have. Julio, this is going to be the last comment, after which what we're going to do is open for some questions, and then we'll have a second chapter of this, which is going to be about dreaming. What is it that we want to look forward to and recommend as we go forward? Julio.
Yeah. So I want to also build up from Asunción's comments, because I think we have to, so this inclusion, we talked about the inclusion of people and stakeholders, and that's critical, but I think we have to also think about inclusion of instruments, okay? And let's start with instruments. I think we have to connect and align different instruments. We have to connect taxation, have to connect regulation, because we have mayors here that are always saying, we don't have money, but we don't need money from cities. No, we don't need money from cities. We need regulation, we need taxation, and we need the civil servants working collaboratively, breaking down silos and working on systemic projects, programs in the city. So we don't need money from cities. We need money from investment banks, and we now have the Climate Bank in Europe, from private companies, and so forth. So that's taxation, regulation, research and innovation, procurement. So we have to connect all these initiatives, all these instruments, and align to the missions. That's the first inclusion. And the second inclusion thing is initiatives we have. For example, in terms of climate change in cities, there are 5-6 initiatives. We have C40, we have Climate Kick, we have Eurocities, we have Covenant of Mayors, we have the World Business Council for Sustainable Development working at city level, we have the UN Habitat. So we have all these initiatives. We have to connect and align. And I think that should be the focus of the mission, to work together, to convene all these initiatives and work together towards the mission.
I think that this is extremely important because it's not we are going to reach some level of frustration. If we are thinking that the mission is only the budget that R&D is going to provide, we will be failed. The mission needs to be the driver. We have this, like the money from the R&D is the catalyzer, and we need to mobilize the rest of the society regarding money, regarding inquietude, regarding interest, crowdfunding, everything that we have in our hand. But we need to describe since the beginning that the mission is not just a question to have a very big budget and everybody is coming to take a piece. It's just the opposite. The mission is the nucleus, and we need to add another value, including money for all the actors.
Absolutely. Thank you. Now, could I take a couple of questions from the audience, comments from the audience, everybody who has one? If not, we'll move on. Yes? 1, 2, 3. Okay. Behind you, there's a microphone.
Thank you. I'm Jo, and I am the head of the Independent Evaluation Unit at the Green Climate Fund. So my question to the panel is, almost all of the climate funds today, including the GCF, the GEF, the CIF, etc., are thinking about transformational change. Yeah? And there's a book that I read over the winter which says, it's by 2 AI scientists, which says, why can greatness not be planned? So it essentially speaks about transformation, but transformation, which is essentially a discontinuous function, exactly like the way you described it, which can't be seen unless you're looking at it retrospectively. And I wanted to get your opinion about it. So unless you're looking backwards, you can't identify things that are going to be transformative, and there are very few predictors of what can be potentially transformative. So I wanted to get your sense, given that all of you are talking about missions, and how those ideas could be consistent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's take the other 2.
That works, yes. Okay, thank you very much. Well, I would like to say very, 3 very small things. The first one, I agree with Dr. Matsukato that probably the main problem we have is economic theory mainstream, and really we have to work on that, and we have to work on that on faculties, on economic faculties. I mean, I've been for 3 decades on an economics department, and I know what I'm talking about. And so it's very problematic because at policy, very high policy level, is still going on this very narrow idea what's economic. The second thing is the budget. Of course, I'm very worried. I'm a member of the European Parliament, and I'm very worried about the Finnish proposal of this 84. But I'm especially worried because it is true that a member state will invest too, so there's only one part of the whole research investment at the European Union level, because all member states, private enterprises and so on and so forth. But my main concern is that probably one of the aspects of the Horizon Europe that could be more in danger because of this cut, I think, is missions. So because mission is something new and something that really needs to, not just how the budget will end up at the end, but as you say, something that really needs to change other things, not only and to enlighten other parts of the Horizon Europe. So for that, we really need budget for that. And the third thing is, since we have Kirsten Duplo here as well, and because the KICS is also a very interesting experience. Now we have to modify the EIT. I'm with those files, by the way, and how will finally be aligned, how you see that could be finally aligned with missions, because it's something that is already working. Some of them are working quite well, in my opinion. So now we need really to align that very well with missions. Thank you.
Thank you. And there was a question here and one here.
Hello. My name is Marcos Escudero. I'm working here in the Spanish State Administration, so I'm a civil servant. And I recently read your books, Mariana, Entrepreneurial State and The Value of Everything. They were really inspiring, and I really recommend them to everyone before I started working in the administration. So my question is, Well, I completely agree with you in that we need a change in the underlying economic theory that many people assume as true, and it must be questioned, like all economic theories probably, and that we really need a different way of working. In the ministries, in the European Commission, you really see it, how we still work in silos. But my question is, and also relating to this experience you had in the UK, how much of a change in the administrative structures do we need, and especially a change in the laws, in the legal framework, and because this is something that could take also a lot of time to change and to shape in the way we need, and if you see it visible.
Okay, thank you. Can we pass it forward here?
Thank you. My name is Jose Jimenez. I work in the European Commission. I'm one of these poor guys who have to implement the beautiful ideas of Mariano and Carlos Moedas, and it's not easy anyway. But just a clarification on the budget first. The mission will have the budget that you discussed correctly. There will be other parts of in Horizon Europe which clearly will contribute to the missions. We talk about partnership clusters, so let's be a bit optimistic. Yes, there will be 5 billion euro or whatever, but at the end of the day, there will be additional money. And we have the challenge that you mentioned here. We need to make sure that all these different, sometimes maybe silo conceptual programs work together, including, by the way, the KICS, which is part of Horizon Europe as well, and we are aligned along the goal. That's one thing. But now I really want, apart from saying that, to really profit to have Mariana in front of me today, after having worked for her already 1 year, even if she doesn't know, and basically to ask her, I mean, we have these limited resources that we will have indeed. Of course, we have to look at it a different way. We have a privilege. We have a mission concept, and we'll have the privilege to have a substantial amount of money that you call yourself catalyst, glue money, whatever you want to call it. It's peanuts as compared to the challenge. Of course, we know that whatever it is, 1 billion euro or 2 billion euro for the mission that you presented, Julio, on 100 climate neutral cities. We know we're talking about trillions here of investments, so we know this nothing. So my real question is, Mariana, if I will give you, not me, Carlos Moedas or the new commission will give you the check of the 1 billion euro to you now, what would you do with it? What would you invest it in? What would you say? This is really important for us because we will need to spend it, by the way. Would you spend it in social innovation, new concepts? Will you spend it in technical, advanced, technological issues on energy and transport? I know it's complicated. You may give the answers now, and if not, please write to me and give me the answer later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, let me summarize. So we have a question on how does one plan for non-linear transformational change, since non-linearity is rather hard to produce as a controlled effect. How can the KICS align with missions? I can certainly speak to that with passion. To what extent, how much do we need to change administrative structures and legal frameworks to do this, and how quickly can we do that? Because time matters here. And then if we had $1 billion, what would we spend it on? Where does it really need to go to have the greatest effect? Shall we start with the first question? How do we plan? How does one architect for transformational non-linearity?
I want to speak to that. I'm not sure I agree. This is how I see it. We are already living and coping with a massive transformation. That's the transformation of the climate around us. That's an unwanted, non-planned transformation. And I think this transformation, the response to it is a deliberate transformation that takes you where you want to go. And that's why the concept of societal transformation is, I love it, the second part of the climate change adaptation in the mission. But I believe the transformation and the societal transformation is embedded in the mission. I don't think it's so problematic that you need to look behind. Things are transforming so quickly at an incredible speed, right? The time of the transformation of the first industrial revolution versus the time of what has happened with digital technologies, it's just absolutely, it cannot compare, right? So I think we live under those transformations. We just need to grapple and control it. It's part of the mission control, I think.
But
to redirect it.
Would you describe creating the conditions for transformational effects in response to that as being a mechanism of real-time adaptation?
I believe that the cascades of risk that we see and the impacts that we see completely off the charts of what climate models have tells us that the only possibility to adapt is eventually through that transformation. Because otherwise we are forcibly transformed, and we need to respond with a transformation that is deliberate, that is controlled. And I don't mean to say this as a top-down thing, but it is about controlling where the mission and where do you want to go.
Mariana, thank you.
I don't know if we can just each say something, maybe, yeah? So I think I agree with half of what you said, but of course you can plan for transformation. The issue is that along the way, a lot of shit's going to happen that you didn't expect. You know, think of Viagra. It wasn't meant to do what people are using for it today. It was for the heart, and then something else went up. That is you're supposed to laugh. No one laughing. That is, serendipity, the kind of search for one thing leads to the discovery of something else. It's a common trait of innovation. But if you don't plan for the transformation, you won't catalyze. So there's a wonderful quote in The Little Prince, by the guy who wrote The Little Prince, Saint-Exupéry. He said, you don't build ships by just getting wood and throwing them at people and say, build a ship. You need to make them dream about the deep blue sea. And then they have a reason to get all the wood and to make the ship. So the planning, we need to almost change what we mean by planning. Planning currently, just even the word planning, makes people think of the Soviets or the Chinese or a developing country on the way to becoming developed. We're always planning. The problem is we have such static tools to plan. And even when we do things which fail, think of the Concorde plane. It's not flying, and it's the typical example where people say it was picking winners, it's a failure. There's never been done a proper study, economic study, looking at all the spillovers and the kind of dynamic externalities that happened along the way. So even though the plane's not flying, cross-sectorally, a lot of things happened. And that's both a feature of innovation, but you also have to nurture it. This kind of spillover effects can be nurtured themselves, and that's why in the missions, one of the criteria of the 5 is to not only get cross-sectoral kind of collaboration, but to really fuel those dynamic spillovers, which means kind of making things happen along the way. And the kind of exam question that would have been interesting to ask about the moon, we could have gone to the moon probably and back again, but in a very linear top-down way. And it wouldn't have fueled all the things that are currently in our smart products today, right? So many of the key technologies in our phones, from the internet, GPS, touchscreen, Siri, actually trace their kind of, initial ambition towards some mission or another. And then along the way, these technologies happened. And so it's different to say that from you can't plan the transformation. It's just changing what planning means to be really ambitious, mission-oriented, and then along the way allow a lot of serendipity to happen, which then gets also measured. Because if we don't know how to measure it and we continue to use these static tools like cost-benefit, we won't even allow the mission to begin in the first place.
Yeah, I just want to stress this idea of agility, let's say. So we have to change our mind. So we are used to do a strategic plan for 5-6 years, and now it's not working. If we think, for example, about the IT sector, did any of the people in the IT sector 12 or 15 years ago even imagine a smartphone like we have now? Did they plan a 10-year program to develop a smartphone? I'm not an expert on this. I don't think they did that.
But the technology, yes. The internet was a 5, 10, 20-year period, so it wouldn't be a smartphone without that technology.
No, of course.
And that was planned.
Yeah, but it was planned, the idea, and I mean the challenge, the mission, but not the specific pathway.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
Or we have an example in my university. Kristen mentioned about our university decarbonizing the curriculum. Do you think that the president decided it 4 years ago?
Yeah.
No. Yeah. We start working, we start reflecting, we start bringing people together, and then we, on the way, developed our plans. So I'm a super fan of the collective intelligence concept. So for me, the critical thing is have a mission and bring people together. And so create the context where people can collaborate. And with this, we will find a way. and we will iterate, we will go. We have to apply these lean startup ideas, these agile ideas. Now, big companies don't have strategies anymore, some of them. But the most innovative ones, they don't have strategic plans because they are on this new concept of working and iterating and learning by doing as well. So I think we have to implement this in our missions as well.
We are changing. We have a broken idea. We need to disrupt everything. We cannot begin to repeat the same thing and try to modify it slightly along the way. It's a different idea. It's a different concept. It's extremely risky. I want to say that. It has been already commented with Mariana. But think that the risky is the only possibility to get a major challenge. If not, also we can get frustration. We need to know since the beginning. Every risk, every big challenge can have the payback of the frustration.
So let me build on that and then ask you to pick up on everyone, legal and administrative structures. How do we lean in, take some risks, and shake up the way we administer and the way we run law? How quickly can we do that?
So that was the third question, which I think is actually related, at least my answer to your question would be related to the third question. I mean, I spent the whole day yesterday in Brussels talking about competition policy. And it's very interesting because Schumpeter, everyone thinks that Schumpeter, because he's the guy who talked about creative destruction, is the big innovation theorist. He took everything from Marx. What he actually said that was interesting and unique was about competition. And he said, we currently have a theory of competition and measures of competition. So today we would look at antitrust policies, state aid policies that relate to that, which have nothing to do with how innovation actually occurs. Because innovation is constantly causing disequilibria, which you were basically talking about, differences between economic actors, so heterogeneity, not representative agents. So what's interesting is how do we change, as you say, the laws, the regulations, but also the state aid rules in such a way that really even allow a lot of the stuff that we're talking about. And when I spoke to Margaret Vestager recently and I presented her with it, she said, Mariana, come on, show me where exactly in the state aid rules it says you can't do this stuff. And she was basically right. The way that we have allowed ourselves to interpret what was meant to actually be transformative, if you really read the state aid rules, I'm being a bit lenient and nice to them right now, it's as long as you're transforming, as long as you're really creating a new space and catalyzing something that's not happening, so what we would call additionality in economics, making things happen that would not have happened anyway, then it's fine. The irony is that when you have states or government and public institutions that forget what public value is, what it means to be mission-oriented, you end up thinking very small and you end up crowding out, this accusation of crowding out. The irony is you crowd out when you think small. And so we need to be very careful of also redesigning and making more explicit, more obvious in the state aid rules and also in antitrust policy that the problem is not big, big is bad, big tech is bad, break up big tech. No, we need a more refined understanding of value creation, value extraction. This is sort of a different conversation, which I won't go into. But on state aid, how do you make sure, and this is what I was talking about before with the problems in Italy, where I'm from, where there's a really parasitic, inertial, static public-private relationship. How do you transform, redesign the procurement policy so it's more conditional on business really transforming, reinvesting like the steel sector did in Germany, where the condition for the loan it received from the KfW was they had to reduce their material content. And Bell Labs, I always try to remind people, Bell Labs, which was probably the most innovative private sector company in the history, kind of the last 100 years, came about in a period where the public sector was much more bold, mission-oriented, and AT&T, which had a monopoly, the idea was that you don't have a monopoly from God, but it's the state that gave it to you. So the condition to retain the monopoly is reinvest your profits, no hoarding, invest in innovation, and invest in big innovation beyond telecommunications. And AT&T said, fine, we'll do Bell Labs, basically. So we need to rethink the relationships, the conditionalities to make sure that we stop this massive siphoning of value out of the system. Globally, $3 trillion have been spent in the last 10 years, talking about numbers, 5 billion, we were saying missions. 3 trillion has been used for share buybacks by the largest companies in the Fortune 500. So that's fine if they're working on their own. Let them do what they want. but they're benefiting from huge public investments. We need to be bold and redesign both the laws, the contracts, and the policies that catalyze a reinvestment towards public goals and public missions. And it's not going to happen if we don't do exactly what he was saying. And with my 1 billion euros, literally today, I would set up, sorry if this sounds a bit arrogant, but master classes for the civil servants across Europe. For 2 weeks, I'll bring them anywhere, I don't know, the Italian Alps or a Greek island, you choose, to literally unpick everything we're talking about here. Because if we don't change these design issues, it's all just talk. And I do think, coming to your question, we have to hold governments accountable and the European Commission accountable. If we don't change the way we're doing things, then I think we should force them to shut up, to not use the word mission. Keep using the old words, it's fine. Just keep doing what you were doing, but don't use missions as an excuse to do what you were doing before, which we know did not lead to a more sustainable, inclusive, and smarter economy. And we should, I think you in the mission boards should become a bit aggressive, but politely. You should, bat your eyes, be very sweet and beautiful and drink tea and everything. But you need to say, guys, if this doesn't actually change how we do the loans, the grants, the procurement, the state aid rules, the budgeting, the ECFIN mania about deficits. So again, Greece is being told, cut, 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 when actually what Greece lacks is all the mission-oriented organizations, including a dynamic strategic public bank, including the kind of Fraunhofer, Max Planck institutes. If we don't look at that stuff, which is a system of innovation, then we really need to shut up and stop using this word, which will just get captured to do what was being done anyway.
I just wanted to throw one more layer again to this fantastic discussion. When I think the missions, and again, one of the things that are exciting is the desire to reach out to citizens. So it's not only the budgets, but one of the things that can be achieved is to create a movement. And a movement can move all sorts of different things. It's not a very economistic thinking. I'm the philosopher. But I think it matters very much. And that can be something that tips the scale in one or in another direction. And I mean, look at what happens when citizens really are angry.
But what is
I'm
the
not
citizen?
I'm not even saying more, right? We're in Madrid.
And let me perhaps come in here with and I'm going to ask between the two of us also to talk a little bit about the knowledge innovation communities, because that's exactly, in some ways, that's similar to the role they're playing. The KICs, so knowledge innovation communities, are one of the many instruments that are two things are happening. They are not actually joined up with other instruments as much as they need and should and could be. And they're currently very much subject to some extremely narrow thinking on what does performance and success look like. Have you produced products and services that have produced a 15% financial return, if not successful? It is hard to argue that a 15% return in the immediate time frame of the last 10 years and the next 2 to 3 is added value for addressing climate kick, because as an investor, that would place me right on the wrong side of incentivizing short-term market exits and short-term financial gain within the existing rules and the existing economic logic. So it puts me at odds with being an investor in disruptive intent, which is in fact my core purpose. So interestingly, in relation to the missions, the KICs are an interesting set of dialogues around the missing piece in the mission architecture, which is how are we going to implement this? Because if you give $1 billion immediately out there in the world, you give 100 million to 100 cities, no one is set up to manage that, administer it, orchestrate it. Most importantly, no one is set up to do it in a way that is different to a set of incremental flow-throughs into existing work that reassures everybody that value for money will have been spent and that we can see the outcome tomorrow. So setting it up in such a way that it actually, my answer to your question would have been very much around designing for viral dynamics. Systems can change themselves, but you need to ask innovation to engage with that and not try to control it. And that means working in a very different way in the way in which innovation works to deliberately spread multiple things, very different things, connect them, and structure them in such a way to learn from what is a structural understanding that nothing has the answer to everything. You're going to want hundreds of solutions playing together simultaneously, and you're going to need to invest in the capability to learn from them fast enough to change then the enabling frameworks, policies, capital allocation, regulations to enable transformation. I think the question that I would have for all of us is how. So the KICS outlays many other instruments, and I completely take your point. One of the unforeseen consequences, or perhaps it's foreseen, of translating into a public context the Chicago School kind of market dynamics has been to insist that every public instrument needs to compete, because that's how you get healthy economics and how you get healthy human behavior. And then you end up with C40 competing with Climate Kick, competing with the JPI, competing with this, competing with that. Everybody's taking a slight little bite. It's like being pecked to death by ducks. It doesn't actually get you transformative outcomes. So how might we challenge and hold ourselves to account to collectivize intent? How do you structure for collective intelligence that's more than just a philosophical concept or a nice idea?
I think one, and sorry for bringing the bad news, but I really think that part of the work, as I see it on these missions, is to really lay out to our societies in all European countries the huge risks of irreversible, substantive, deep change that we are facing. And it's not that we want fear to mobilize, but I think it's extremely important not to forget we need an important dose of pragmatism and realism. And the pragmatism and the realism nuances and supports at the same time the idea of the mission and the dream. If you have a dream and you don't have a realistic idea of what it takes to get there, I think it's a mission that is doomed to fail. So that would be one immediate point, that I think we need to really work at the pragmatic part of the huge risk that climate change is posing on us is extremely scary, very, very scary. And to see the science that is coming from the sixth assessment report, it is very, very, very scary.
So Climate Kick, for example, is supporting two initiatives. To give an example, to see, am I picking up on your point? One of them is to work with an organization that has made a comparison between the way in which governments have invested in security and terrorism and the way in which they've invested in climate change. And the comparison they've made is the amount of money that governments have invested to raise public awareness of the risks of terrorism in order to have a mandate from the public to put airport security measures in, to make us buy things in 100 mils, every single thing that we do, because we never question that this keeps us safe. Right. And when you look at climate change, not one single government has systematically invested in getting a mandate from the public across every party to act in the interests of public safety and planetary safety. So that's one thing we are funding to help. The other thing is a concept called Fridays of the Future. Working with Fridays for the Future movement, working with the cities that we are supporting in big systems change deep demonstrations, and initiating an initiative whereby every Friday in the city we practice bringing the future forward. You stop the cars, you put vegan on the menu in restaurants, school kids start to reverse mentor politicians. Every single Friday we start to practice what might it look like if we lived regeneratively. After a while you get used to it. After a while you begin to understand the risk and fear it a bit less and start to get creative. Does that meet the kind of things you would suggest?
Can I just say something on top of that? So, because you talked about both collective intelligence, but also, this notion of the citizen, to be honest, I sometimes feel like it's like a minestrone soup of everything that's not like a private sector or a government. Actually, citizens, the way they have achieved things in the past was through movements, including the labor movement, which got us the weekend, not bad, the 8-hour workday, not bad. And there was real inspiration. It wasn't about what not to do. It was also how cool if we have 2 days in our week where we don't work. So one question I have for the labor unions is, what's the equivalent of the weekend that we should be kind of, fighting for in this space? But also, if you look at things like UBI, Universal Basic Income, I don't know what you call it here in Spain, it's not that I don't support it, I actually do. But the narrative, which you said sometimes isn't important, actually it is, because to inspire and to get collective intelligence, the idea that, the wealth creators in Silicon Valley will hand back to the citizens 20K, 15K, the narrative actually continues to uninspire. So as soon as you change that to a citizen's dividend or a citizen's share, a share in what? In what you helped create, not just dogmatically, you're helping us, but for real. So how do you really bring citizens to the table to define the missions, to also assess them along the way, to know when to turn the tap off if things aren't working, but also to really, again, make them as inspirational. The David Attenborough film called Blue Planet, the last episode on plastics, has done more to raise awareness, and this is coming from the cultural sector, amongst children, and I have 4 children, and all of them know everything there is to know about the plastic in the ocean from that documentary. The question is, how do you bring the cultural, the artists, even artists who are not necessarily paid as artists, but who can really contribute, the poets, to the table to inspire. So I do think we need to be careful and stop just using the citizen, but to talk about the labor movement, the creative people who, which are also students themselves who are on the street. They are redefining how to even do a movement. I remember the automobile industry had, the UAW had street theater at one point as the way that they were actually also kind of coordinating the movement away from a very top-down way in which labor was working. And I just think we should make sure that we don't use the word citizen to actually stop using things like class, social class. They still matter, and there's a whole bunch of people from certain class backgrounds that are not benefiting even from the IT revolution because we didn't ask these questions. And the state of California is very interesting because they're rebelling against the federal kind of climate denial, but also they're rethinking the instruments like a state fund, a wealth fund, where the public benefit goes in order to actually fuel things that citizens also can really benefit from, including public education. But that comes from the profits that have also been co-created, as opposed to thinking that value is just created in the private sector.
Thank you. So we're nearly at the end. In fact, we've got literally a minute each. So I'm going to ask one last thing, and I'm going to start with Carmen, so prepare yourself. We're in a context which is global. We're in Spain. Spain is hosting Chile. And this entire context is one of the few moments in which the planet actually comes together in different spaces and kind of passes each other like ships in the night and bumps into each other and has coffee in random ways. Missions. Should Europe exercise its leadership, seize a moment in missions to make this a global movement? When we talk about citizens, should we be talking about global citizens? What, as members of the mission boards, what is your vision for how global the missions should become and the role that Europe plays in a global context?
At least by now, we need to consider the definition of mission according to the Parliament. And mission is an R&I program, different kind of R&I program for Europe. But we know that in this respect, regarding soil, citizen, climatic change, we are part of the problem, we can be part of the solution, but only part. If the rest of the world, if the problem is not globally addressed, we are going to have a problem. But on the other hand, I think that even that the others are not doing, we need to go ahead. I think it's like with the citizen. Many people consider that all the climatic change, all the problems regarding environment is the responsibility of the others. And this is the major risk that we can have. If I am citizen, well, really we have a problem, there are movies, there are a lot of documents, there are a lot of information, we have a problem, but it's not my responsibility. It's from you, for the politician. We have a problem, And it's the same if we at Europe say, well, the mission is too small, we are not able to solve the problem, so we will keep seated. Just the opposite. It's part of a problem and need to be part of the solution, keeping in mind the globality of the problem. But we need to go ahead any case. It's not an excuse to say, well, because China. No, we need to go ahead If we can lead, fantastic. If not, make our way. And probably the other will be the followers.
Thank you. Julio.
Yeah, so I want to stress this point. I mean, if we talk about climate change in cities, is my mission. I mean, we cannot solve this problem only in Europe. Of course, climate change is a global problem, that's for sure. And we have instruments. So, for example, not maybe every, but most of the cities in Europe has sister cities around the globe. So we can work with these instruments that we have to replicate ideas and to work together with other cities in the world. And there are other initiatives. For example, there is an initiative in India to have 100 climate neutral cities by 2030 in India, my God. And they are working on this. We have to partner with them. Of course, we cannot work alone, I think, but I agree that we have to start with ourselves, of course, and be showcased, because I think what is important from at least our mission is to showcase that there is a business case for that. That is not just good for environment, which is, but it's also the most smart thing to do, the most intelligent thing, because it's good for creating jobs, for the economy. So we have to break down also the paradigm that we have. And I want to reinforce your comment on narratives. I think it's really, really, really important, of course. Maybe one of the most important things. And I think one problem we have, and we don't reflect a lot on this, and I know Kristen is a very fan of this idea of identities and people. So I hate the idea of behavioral change. So it's not about behavioral change. We have a culture, we have an identity. When we talk about our way of life, when we talk about cars in cities, our way of cooking or living in our households, it's part of our identity. We have to work on this. And the problem many times is that we know, if you ask somebody, do you want a more sustainable city for you? They would say, of course, yes. But what does this mean? So we need the artists, we need to provide us with some inspiration and some dreams for the future, because people like the idea, but they don't know what this means and how this could change their identities, and how can we create shift a bit the culture in Europe. So I think we have to work a lot on this.
Thank you, Julio.
I mean, evidently, climate change risks are transboundary, right? So, I mean, the climate change risk and the impacts in Africa are going to affect Spain. And you have the example of, some areas of the world reaching the limits of adaptation. This means migration for certain parts of Europe. Okay? So a lot of very difficult questions there. So in that sense, it's global. On the other hand, I think that it's risky at this early stage of the missions to make it too big, because there is a lot of vulnerable communities in many European societies, and I think we need to take care of those vulnerable communities first and pin down what the missions mean at the European level.
Okay, thank you very much, Mariana.
Just really quickly.
1 second.
Missions are global, so after Paris, a group was formed globally called Mission Innovation, and the Clean Energy Ministerial, and they were supposed to work on missions together, and then the private sector set up the breakthrough, right, Bill Gates and those guys. It didn't work because they didn't have a framework. They didn't actually ask the questions we talked about today. How does it mean doing things differently? New types, literally redesign of the public-private partnerships, of policy, etc. So what I think Europe should do, by focusing for now on the European area as a lab, like a mission lab, so we really get this right, we redesign our governments, the relationships, and then this becomes a blueprint. That's what we offer the world, so that in the future, if we again talk about mission innovation and the Clean Energy Ministerial, they'll have a new textbook to follow. And it's not actually a textbook. This will always be emergent process. But that's the best thing we can do for the world right now, to take this seriously. And all the questions we asked today were part of that kind of serious reframing, redesign of capitalism.
Thank you very much. So thanks to the government of Spain for hosting Ambition and Inclusion, and thanks to the panelists for a wonderful conversation.